I would ask that everyone make sure their mics are off and their videos, with the exception of our past presidents. Welcome everyone to the AMCD, the Association for Multicultural Counseling and Development, Past Presidents Town Hall. The topic is multicultural and social justice counseling during a double pandemic, racial injustices, and COVID-19, coronavirus 19. I am honored that we have so many people who have joined us this evening. Thank you very much. And we are scheduled to be here from 7 to 9. We have some questions, some guiding questions for our panelists this evening. We will also take questions from the chat box in Zoom, as well as we are streaming live on our AMCD Facebook page, and I will be monitoring the Facebook page and if anyone has questions from the Facebook page. It is my honor to be the moderator for tonight's discussion. I will introduce our panelists, and I will introduce them in order of the years that they were presidents for the Association for Multicultural Counseling and Development. I would also just like to say, unfortunately, Dr. Cortland Lee will not be joining us this evening, and we have in place Dr. Michael Brooks, and I will introduce him in order of the presidencies. Has Dr. Quincy Moore joined? He will be joining. I see him there, Dr. Moore. Okay, Dr. Quincy Moore was the AMCD president in 1992, 1993. Dr. Quincy Moore was inspirational in starting our AMCD mentoring program that we continue to this day. We also have Dr. Patricia Arredondo. She was president during the 1996-97 year, and she also is a past president for the American Counseling Association. We also have Dr. Gargi Rosakar. Some of you might recognize published work from her, Dr. Gargi Rosakar Sadowski. She was AMCD president 2001-2002, and she is also a fellow with the American Psychological Association's Division 17, 45, and 56. And she was also the editor for the Journal of Multicultural Counseling and Development from 2004 to 2011. We also have Dr. Surichi West Alatunje, who was AMCD president 2007, 2008. Dr. Surichi was also, Surichi West Alatunje was also, is also a past ACA president. And she is currently leading the Center for Traumatic Stress in New Orleans. We also have Dr. Kent Butler, who is a past president from 2011 to 2012. Dr. Kent Butler is currently at University of Central Florida, and he was just recently elected president-elect for the American Counseling Association. We also have Dr. Michael Brooks. Dr. Michael Brooks is from North Carolina A&T State University. Dr. Michael Brooks was AMCD president from 2013 to 2014. Dr. Brooks serves on the editorial board for the Journal of Multicultural Counseling and Development. We also have Dr. Katarina Chang. She is a past president from 2015 to 2016, and she is at Georgia State University, and she has a specialization in the multicultural counseling competencies, as all of our presenters this evening, as well as trauma. And she is served as the president for Chi Sigma Iota from 2009 to 2010. So I welcome our panelists, and I am Dr. Tanya Tinsley, and I am the current president for the Association for Multicultural Counseling and Development. I want to make sure that all of our presenters' videos and mics are on. So Could all of our presenters turn their videos and mics on, unmute themselves? Oh, Gargi, you might have to unmute it again one more time. Hello, AMCD past presidents.
Greetings.
Hello, greetings.
Good evening.
Thank you so much for being here this evening. I am just honored to be with you to have this discussion during this time of racial injustice, racism, COVID-19. Before we get started in the conversation, Dr. Kent Butler provided me with a video that I would like to share to lead into our discussion. Wait a minute, let me find the video.
Does anybody?
There you go. I'm not seeing it, so you have to share your screen.
It's not reading the,
You want me to send it? Want me to do it?
yes, please, because for some reason it's not opening on my screen.
Hold on.
So let me give you. Got it, Dr. Butler?
Yeah. Sorry, everyone. I'm assuming you see my screen.
Yes. Yes.
Unfortunately, something's happening with mine as well. It may not be letting me show it.
Yeah, it wasn't letting me show it from the Dropbox either.
I'm not on the Dropbox, but hold on. Now it's saying that the videos are not. Go on. We'll show it later.
Okay. Can you stop sharing your screen, Dr. Butler?
Does anybody hear me? Ooh. Is anybody listening to what's going on? Before we move on, does anybody hear me? Does anybody hear me? Is anybody listening? Is anybody listening? How can we change? Hey, before it's too late. Young with dreams, had them for a long time. Well, nothing's impossible as long as you put your mind to it. Sometimes you wanna let go, hold on tight, but you gotta believe with God on your side. Does anybody hear me? Does anybody hear me? Is anybody listening to what's going on? Before we move on, does anybody hear me? Does anybody hear me? Is anybody listening? Listen to my people. How can we change? At times I feel like love passed me by. Just imagine how the kids feel inside. Does anybody hear me? Does anybody hear me? Is anybody listening? Is anybody listening? On before we move on. Does anybody hear me? Does anybody hear me? Is anybody listening? Listening to me? How can we change before it's too late? Before it's too late. Does anybody hear me? You feel you need a friend. Is anybody listening to what's going on before we move on? Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Butler. Can anybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
What's going on? I would like to start off with any particular order of the panelists. You know, for me, I'm all about the counselor as a person, the counselor as a professional. So I want to check in with you personally. How are you doing? How have you been doing with everything that's going on right now?
Tanya, I just heard the president say that he intends to send the American military into the streets. And he's calling us protesters domestic terrorists. So it's getting worse. And I really feel like fighting.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that.
Even though I was brought up to be peaceful in my country of origin, to be non-violent, but I completely understand what is happening. And I feel that being non-violent is being passive and being complicit.
I agree, Gargi, and I'm just grateful that Dr. Tinsley brought us all together tonight.
I am.
This is there's you plan something, but you have to be in the moment. And the powerful statement from Dolores Huerta is that every moment is an organizing moment.
Yes.
Every opportunity to bring about change and every opportunity to be an activist.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all of us here, and I'll just come in, you know, I think activism takes many forms, and today and all this period of time, we can use our voice to be activists. And that's what I'm choosing to do. So I can also, in some ways, the hurt, like you were saying, the frustration I feel, I have to get it out somehow. And this evening, this conversation, writing personal statements is helping me to get it out.
Yes.
You know,
Dr. Moore, we can't hear you. Is your... Can't hear you, Dr. Moore. We lost your mic or something. You're unmuted, but we can't hear you. You're unmuted, so we just can't hear you.
Tanya, if I may,
Yes.
in regards to the question that you asked, I have good days and bad days, and maybe not even good days and bad days in terms of totality, but times within the day in which I'm feeling moved. So I've dedicated myself from watching a lot of the footage and things that are on, because I need to protect myself in some regards. But before this, every day I walked out of my door, I knew I was a Black man. And now I really know that I'm a Black man and what that target looks like on my back. I see people asking about the video. I'm still in the process of getting the rights to be able to show that on, for it to be posted. So I hesitate to be able to share it right now, but I am in the process of getting approval to be able to, because I have the song underlying, and so if you will bear patience with me in regards to that. But I will tell you that I hurt. I'm in pain, and I feel every brunt of what that is, because while that was not me, that was laying there, in a sense it was, because it really hits strongly in the Black community, where someone is taken from us, and it's so inhumanely. And so I'll leave it there. But I've been checking in with my brothers. I've been checking in with my sisters, my wife, my family. You have to. I mean, our survival is resting upon the laurels of our forefathers, our ancestors. They told us that we can do this, we can get through this. And whether President Trump wants to send military to the streets or not, we know that the purpose behind this goes far behind what that one man and his atrocities can do to the world.
Thank you, Dr. Butler. Dr. Moore, still can't hear you. I don't know what happened. We heard you earlier.
Tanya, I'll go while
Okay.
Dr. Moore continues to work on his sound. I guess, similar to Dr. Butler, it really just depends on what's going on and what's happening that day. But there has been a cumulative effect. So, I think I was sort of holding it together for a while there, and was definitely taking social action, being engaged, being involved. And I think the last few days and the events, I have just taken my breath away. Yeah. And it's been really difficult. So I think I was managing with some good days, some bad days, but, and certainly we had heard news of different events that had occurred over the past couple of months. But the last few days has been very, very difficult. And I felt it emotionally, physically, psychologically, relationally, just every possible way. And I think that my vulnerability is probably what's most salient and prominent. The idea that we live in an environment where someone could just do us harm, the ultimate harm, and that it seems as though nothing changes, nothing is done. We still have, white people who still don't see what the problem is, and it just goes on and on and on. So it's just a moment to catch my breath, and I'm so glad that you organized this to have us to come together and have community, because that sense of community is going to help us to not feel alone, and to know that we matter, if only to each other. And so that's important. And I thank you also for the statement that you had posted on behalf of AMCD. So I appreciate your efforts to help us to come together as a community, as a family, to be able to not only talk about these things, but to just be together, to have energy together, and to be supportive. So I really do appreciate that. It has been very, very difficult.
Thank you. Dr. Moore? Do you have headphones in, Dr. Moore, that are plugged into your computer? Did you go into your settings and change your, what I'm gonna do is in your chat box, I'm gonna send a phone number, stay on the video, but then call in, okay?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay, and so while he's doing that, Katerina?
Yes, so I just want to start off with saying that I love that the first question you threw out to us was about checking in with us, because I think so much of what's happening is professional for us as counselors and counselor educators, but for communities of color and for anyone who believes in social justice advocacy, it's a personal hit. It's a personal issue, and I think each of us are impacted personally. And so I also appreciate just the vulnerability that the past presidents have already talking, because we're not okay. And I think that, you know, and at least in my culture and in my family, we're so used to trying to put on a face saying, no, it's fine, we're resilient, we can get over this. But there's power in admitting that things are not okay, and that we have good days and we have bad days. And so grateful to be in a community where it's okay to say that I'm not okay, that I go from days of feeling extreme sadness to extreme anger. And it could be, you know, just hearing something or seeing something posted on Facebook. So I appreciate that question. And I also just want to encourage each of us to really check in with ourselves to say, how are you doing today? You know, just to be in tune. So similarly, I have good days and bad days, and it's wonderful to be in a community where we can share and be together. And so I think if we're going to get through this, we're going to get through this with community.
Yes, thank you. And I thought it was very important to start off with the personal question. I've talked to so many clients, students, colleagues, professionals, and I think we need to let them know, just like we let our students and our clients know it's okay to own their feelings. I think we are modeling for those that are on and going to be listening later, that their feelings and emotions are going to run a gamut on a continuum, whether they want to fight, whether they're isolating themselves, and anything in between. And so it is important to have a community and have a safe space to talk about how you're feeling, or to have that quiet time to be able to process. Because what I want to, sorry, I just lost my train of thought, but it's important to share how you're feeling and have that space to do that. And we also have to make sure that we have different outlets. So I appreciate that. Dr. Moore, did you come on via the phone? Okay, I'm gonna send you the whole thing. I'm gonna email you, check your email. I'm going to go on to the next question, and it's kind of related.
Try to call him and see if he can do it. I'll just put my phone on speaker.
And also, don't forget Dr. Brooks.
Oh, yes, Dr. Brooks, thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if I have anything really to add to what's already been said. I am struggling to try to be anything related to professional. I'm incredibly angry and sad at the same time, which can be competing emotions depending on the sadness and the anger. Dealing with the pandemic in my house was enough. I'm married to a physician, so we are uber health vigilant. And then being the lead lunchroom person and classroom teacher for my two daughters, and then try to maintain my academic life is added pressure. And the little times we can go outside have been heightened by the fear of the little safety that we had. So sometimes I'm scared, and sometimes I'm just flat out angry that we're still dealing with the problems in the way that we're dealing with them. And the basic level of questioning that I get just bother me. Because I want to believe that the country was beyond that. I want to believe that that somebody else could answer these questions before they got to me. And we're still just, too much sympathy, too many prayers, and I'm over it.
Yeah.
So I was going to try to dodge this question because I'm kind of scared of my vulnerability and my anger, because I'm if Gargi's where she is, I'm right there with her. So those are my thoughts.
I'm with you, Michael. Too much of sympathy, too much of feelings. I want to see my white sisters and white brothers join me, and not we people of color and African American men and women and girls and boys talking about it all the time. Nothing is happening for the past, well, I've been in this country now 40 years. Of the past 40 years, nothing has really changed.
He's ready to talk to you all now.
Can you hear me? Oh, I can hear.
Turn the volume down on your computer. Go ahead, Quincy.
Okay, let me say this. I want to thank Ken for that tape. It means so much to all of us. When I watched George Floyd die, and I looked at him and I saw all of us throughout the years, from the Revolutionary War to this very day. Somehow the situation don't seem to change. One of the things that I was concerned about also, when I looked at the situation in Central Park.
Quincy, hold on one second. Quincy, hold on one second. I know that there's an echo going on. If everybody can mute, everybody who's on here, mute. And just let me be free for a second. All right, let's see what happens. All right, Quincy, go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Everybody can hear me now.
Yes.
The one thing that I was saying.
Speak loudly.
Central Park situation. And I looked at, and although, I was talking to a friend of mine, I said Christian Cooper could have been a Clinton Solomon or Ken Butler or Thomas Parham or Michael Brown or myself. All someone has to do is point us out and holler and scream that we're a threat as a black man. And if there had been any police in the park, they would have possibly killed him. Because resisting arrest is nothing more than saying, why are you handcuffed to me? And so, we don't just see it as counselors, we feel it also. I've been involved with development and leadership throughout my whole career. And looking at the lack of leadership has not only hurt me cognitively, but affected me also. And the fact that we continue to deal with the same issues all the time, and you have a president that's talking about sending troops in, and he see no difference between protesters and looters. And that continues to hurt my heart. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I appreciate everything that you all said, which leads me into the next question. I know I have found myself saying, I am just tired. I'm tired. So when people say, I am tired, what does this mean from your perspective, from your experience?
I hear it as mental exhaustion. I hear it as not able to make sense of what is going on. And saying that you're tired is a safe thing to say versus I think I'm losing my mind. And not, you know, not in a joking way, but you know, it's I have that sense, and I've talked to other people, a sense of exasperation. Exasperation, first of all, because of COVID-19, but now talking to people since last week, and when the Ahmaud Arbery situation occurred in Georgia, just, you know, trying to comprehend and talking to people, you know, like everyone says, we end up talking to people who have similar sentiments and sensing their tiredness. And, you know, I end up sometimes getting calls or emails from students who just need someone to hear them out.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's obviously an important role we play, but they're tired, they're mentally exhausted, they're frustrated, and they're looking for answers.
See, Patricia, I worry about that. I worry about hearing my colleagues say they're tired because there's a certain sense of helplessness and hopelessness and exhaustion. And that's what the system wants out of us, that we would just give up. We would just sit back and let them beat us.
I think the tired, though, is not of exhaustion. It is really a tired of, I mean, I guess Fannie Mae said it the best, right? I'm sick and tired of being tired. And I'm tired.
Yeah.
I'm not tired physically, because I'm going to fight this fight.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm tired of. I'm tired of always having to do that. I'm tired of sitting in white spaces. Who am I?
Yeah.
And having them look at me with blank stares.
Yeah.
I think there's also the issue of transgenerational fatigue. Mm-hmm. So, and we haven't even begun to take a look at that. So the idea is that it's not just this event, and it isn't even just the event in my lifetime. Yeah. It's knowing that this has occurred over and over and over. And this is true for many of us, right, who are dealing with the cultural oppression that is occurring. So I think yesterday was the 99th anniversary of the Tulsa riots, Oklahoma riots, 99 years ago.
Yes.
So if you look at those pictures and you look at some of the pictures today, they're very similar. So 100 years, near about, not much has changed. And the thing is that we do so many of the things that they say we need to do to avoid these things, as though there's something we need to be doing that would somehow help us to not get in these circumstances. But it's not what we're doing. It is the environment that we're in. It is the day-to-day racism that we experience that can be something as small as microaggressions, and we experience those throughout the day, or it could be these macroaggressions that we're experiencing where we never know. So this idea of never knowing, the unexpectedness of it, you know, of when it's going to hit us, when we will encounter these things, it is very disconcerting. And so our tiredness is not just for today or for ourselves. We are collectively tired, and we are tired over generations of constantly picking ourselves up and moving on. So the tired is not that we're going to give up. The tired is just a statement of fact, of reality, that, you know, when people are putting their necks, their feet on our necks, either physically or metaphorically, that it is exhausting and we can't breathe.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Sariti. I'll attend you, Wes. I will also say, you know, when I was in college, I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota. So what's really hard for me is to watch my hometown, talk to my sisters, my sister who's been down to the protest. She asked me all kinds of questions because I'm 11 years older, and she says, is this how it was with Rodney King? So because she didn't know that. But in Minneapolis, when I was in college, we had another situation, and I had a mentor who was an advocate. She was really a person who deposited in me. And I remember one day I was ready to go fight. Come on, we got to go fight. And she said, baby, I'm tired. And that's when it first hit me. This is going on and on and on, generation by generation, but we don't give up the fight just because we're tired. Anybody else?
No, I absolutely agree, because when you said tired, the initial thought was trauma. It's mental tiredness, it's physical tiredness, but it's also, like Teresa said, we're talking about intergenerational trauma, we're talking about systemic trauma, we're talking about complex trauma, and it has a toll. And so when we're talking about tiredness, is I think about, we're sick and tired of being sick and tired. And so realizing that as we work with our clients who are traumatized, we're not just talking about that one event that brought them to counseling. We're not just talking about these collective incidents that we now see on the news. We're talking about things that have happened several years ago, a generation ago, several generations ago. And I think that if we can keep that in mind, that helps us understand the context of why we are tired, and also to respect that tiredness. And my hope is that through that tiredness, we also grow strength and I guess a resurgence and an eagerness to continue to fight.
And I think, Katharina, I think as counseling professionals, we have the capacity, the skills to take some leadership in this, just like we do with our traumatized clients, children, women, men. Very recently, I've been in communications with other professionals who are colleagues, and giving them feedback about implicit bias and making them recognize their biases. So I want to use, well, I have to first acknowledge I'm privileged. I have a great education. I have a good mind. I come from a middle class, upper middle class family. I want to use those privileges to educate my fellow professionals, as well as change policies. Like ACA's statement that Tanya wrote about was pretty shocking to me. And it's the same with APA president. She talked about how if the police were polite, so she's using politeness as the antonym for torture and brutality. So if the police were polite, then the people would respond differently. They completely missed the point. There is this, we have to change through policies, through our political advocacy, through our activism, through our collective action. We just have to reform our systems.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Dr. Moore, are you back on live? Okay. Dr. Butler, Dr. Brooks, anything?
I think in response to the tone deaf, we we sit and we talk about individuals joining us, right? And there's to be talk about allies and allyship. Now, I don't know if it's a buzz phrase or whatever it is. It's anti-racist.
Yeah.
And the thing that I get the most is help me help you, right? Or someone trying to rush in to fix something. And the issue is I can't continually help you help me. I
Yeah.
want you to join in the fight, be there because you want to be there and because
Yeah.
you can the experience, and not because you need to feel it through me in order for you to feel it. The statement that people say that I want to help people lose is I can't imagine. I can't imagine what that's like. Yes, you can. You don't want to imagine what that's like.
Mm-hmm.
Because imagining what that's like puts you into the same fear in which I am in. And you have the privilege to not go there. So you say, I can't imagine what that's like. Come on. I almost cursed just now. And the thing is, because you can't imagine, it makes it that much more, that makes it that much more. And I'll just leave it with ... Because how dare you tell me you can't imagine what it's like to have somebody take away from you. You can say, I don't want this for my son, my daughter, my brother, my mother. No, stop that. What do you do for yourself? Would you do to yourself what you do to me? And if you won't do to yourself what you do to me, then you need to turn that back around and recognize that you're not in this allyship with me.
So in response to that, so I understand the language of allies and stuff, but I think at some point we have to change the narrative. It's everyone's problem.
Yeah.
Don't be my ally, be a part of the race with me. And I love how you phrased it, Dr. Butler, about, how can I help you? Part of the narrative has to be, how can I help myself? Because if there's privilege, oppression, racism everywhere, we're all impacted. And until white folks, until whatever color skin you are, realize this is something that impacts you as well, it's not going to change as quickly as we'd like it to be. Racism hurts everybody. That's
Dr. Brooks, I'm going to kind of guide in to you next, but I'm going to piggyback. Here it is. We're here to talk about multicultural social justice counseling during a double pandemic. We said racial injustices, we said COVID-19, but let's really get to what the problem is. Let's conceptualize it, because I don't want us to keep jumping around without being specific so everyone knows what is the problem. Dr. Brooks, we talked a little bit about yesterday about what the problem is. How would you define what is the problem going on in our society today?
Oh, I was ready to fire up about the last question.
You can read that in as you like. Go ahead.
But I was also going to just try to maybe answer the question with a light example. If you know me, you know I have kids, and I don't know if you've ever seen a piece of paper on the floor, and your kids walk by the piece of paper all day. Maybe you were that child and you walk by the paper all day, and eventually someone reaches a volume level that's earth-shattering. And how many times are you going to walk across this piece of paper and not bend over and pick it up? And that's how I feel about being tired. Like, just how many times are we going to walk over this racist, systemic, oppressive issue and not make an effort to pick it up. So I think that's I don't know if there's one problem. I think there are several issues. If we're going to stay with police brutality, and I'm sorry, Dr. Tinsley, if my memory from yesterday's conversation escapes me, but I'm going to try to just answer it. Just at a very organic place, this country has always thrived on seeing people of color as something different. And it's infiltrated itself to the point where this is just habit. This is just a way of life. So, you know, I can get angry that it exists, but I'm at the point now I can kind of rationalize how we got here. And I think to bust this system all the way down and rebuild it is the one way that I see us achieving something. Something worth really having a significant outcome. I mean, I just see these layers. I think Sarisi talked about the transgenerational trauma and historically, generationally systemic issues. It's just that deep, and it's the habit that we just have grown into being a part of, and that permeates into everything else. I don't want to get academic. Quincy's trying to say something. Listen.
Anyone else? And how do you conceptualize what is going on? That was the question in the initial video that Dr. Brooks said. What is going on?
I think what is going on and has gone on for 400 years is a fact that the whole system has been created by white people for white people. So, as Michael said, people of color are different. So the laws and regulations were not made keeping marginalized societies within the framework. And I think on the basis of the quietness of my white fellow psychologists and counselors, they're not saying much. I think there's a denial of racism. They don't even think it exists.
And let me kind of get back, if you will. I can tell you what my problem is. I don't know what the problem is. I still don't know really what white people are thinking. Like I still walk around and I'm thinking I think I know, and I'm trying to put it, but no one has just come out and said, this is where we stand on this.
Yeah.
And that's confusing and frustrating and a whole bunch of other things, but it would be so.
And it's not me, because the person you're talking to is like, it's not me, and it's it's my mother and my father, and still I don't have an answer. That's I'm sorry.
No, I think it's not deep. It's just for some things, some groups are so clear as to what their position is or how they feel, even if it's majority. But with this group, I'm just like, I don't know what you stand on in particular to these issues. Not the outliers, not the allies, not the exceptions, but really just as a group. I'm like, tell me something.
I think one of the difficulties is that we haven't studied racism, white people, enough, that doesn't get funded. And it's not that we haven't attempted to do so. I can remember 20-something years ago when I was working on my dissertation, I found a news article about a white doctoral student out in California who had a fellowship and she wanted to do her dissertation on white identity and racism. In other words, you know, the pathology of racism. And she was immediately defunded and then kicked out of her doctoral program.
Oh, yeah.
So when we think about it, there are two things that come to mind for me. So one is that we don't research it enough. As much as we are researched as people of color, and you know, we already know that that is overwhelmingly deficit oriented and pathological.
Yeah.
But for all of the research that's out there, for all those white folks and people of color who get tenure off of the research around our pathology, there is very little research about the pathology of racism. So your question, Dr. Brooks, is a real one. We have not really investigated that. There aren't big grants to be able to investigate that. We want to talk about why Johnny can't read, but we don't want to talk about why the teacher is not teaching Johnny. You know, how has the teacher failed Johnny and why? So what's going on? So very little research is done for us to be able to really put them under a microscope and talk about it. And that's important for us in particular, because when we take a look at this issue of the continuousness, the pervasiveness of the traumatic stress for being culturally different, and I'll say it's cultural and not color. It is about culture, it's about our ideology, it's about how we think about things differently. And we know that's true when we start writing these dissertations that are in our minds and how we think, right? And then we have to change our dissertations to what our white advisors and mentors understand and want to write about. It is very ideological, it's very cultural to be able to do that. So this thing is important because much of the trauma that we experience has to do with understanding the reality that we swim in the pathology. We swim in their pathology. And so that's why we're tired. We're navigating in a pathological system. And it is very difficult for us to relax, to be calm, to have fun, to enjoy life and so on, because we are constantly cognitively, emotionally, and psychologically navigating in this pathological environment. So the one to me about what are they thinking, part of it is we don't know because there hasn't been enough scientific empirical evidence of what's going on. The other, one piece we do know, and that is that it's about privilege. Yes. So I can't tell you how many times whether it's someone else or myself who's speaking up and speaking truth about stuff, and white people sit there in silence, and they will text, they will email, they will write you a little note, slip it in your hand, they will whisper in your ears, they're walking out the door. And it's because they know that this is wrong, but they're not going to speak up. And it's clear that they don't want to lose any privileges that they have. If they speak up, they know they're not going to get tenure. If they write about that, they know it's not going to get published, you know, and so on. So I would say we do know about the issue of privilege, yes, but I'm sure that there's a lot that we don't understand about the psychopathology of racism of white people. Or, that is it of racism, period.
Racism. So, you know, you teach a class and you have individuals go and talk, and then the conversation shuts down, right? Because the person who's feeling the pain will get up there and share with their fullness. And then you'll have a classroom of people who don't look like you who will shut down and not join in on the narrative.
Dr. Butler, I'd like to speak. My name is Dr. Ives, and I am the
I'm not sure what happened there, but I will share with you all that the way that this was set up was that individuals who are not on the panel, the chat box, and I understand that you may have something that you would like to share, but in honor of what this program is about, we're asking you to honor the panelists and allow us to bring forth the information that we were asked questions about. Thank you very much.
I want to thank Cerisi for your very poignant comments about white privilege. And, you know, for as many years as I've been in the profession and a professional, it is so true. We are the ones who are always studied. We are always compared to the white majority. The conversations about how you choose a sample, you know, they'll dump all the Asians together. They'll put all the blacks together, all the Latinos together. So there's no differentiation. We're just a group. To researchers who want to focus, as you said, on the cultural differences, but it's more than cultural differences. It's always a deficit-based approach. And unfortunately, I know, and you know, that many of our students get into situations where they cannot say, that isn't really what I want to study, or that's not the methodology I want to use. I want to use qualitative. And then they have to use quantitative measures that are poorly normed, that are inappropriate for use with samples of color. And then again, so the end result is some deficit and some kind of recommendations that we have to be fixed. Someone commented about white fragility. That's probably the only book I have read that begins to unpack in a qualitative way the circumstances of fear of white people. And so Robin DiAngelo, who's the author of the book, really gets to it. They fear us. They fear, of course, losing privileges, but they fear us. And, you know, we might not get into their heads about why they think the way they think. And so, but I would say, as a woman of color personally, all my life, I've had to always know what's going on for white people. I've always had to know how to respond. I've had to know how to walk that margin so that I could, in fact, coexist or, you know, have the upper hand once in a while. But I had to get into that headspace. And I think that's what we have to continue to do. That's what we're continuing to do. And it is, you look at it as a coping strategy. And as also not only a coping strategy, but it's a way of, for myself, it's like, I can read this situation. I know what's going on and I know how to measure that. But you know, I've got the privilege of education as well, and being in these spaces where I get support from other people who I can dialogue about with on these things. And I say that because I feel like after all of the uphill battles we've gone through in the counseling profession, and I think we've made such progress, here we are talking about these hideous societal traumas, this oppression that we've been talking about all our lives. And yeah, I'm hopeful because we're all in this together. Let me just end there.
I just want to say real quickly, there was a comment and I know that there are people who are probably feeling something because of the things that are being said here. There was a comment that was in the chat just now that spoke to, I don't say things because I think I don't know, I don't want to say the wrong thing. Heard that I don't know how many times in my lifetime. I don't say this, I don't say that. If I say the wrong thing, I'm thought of. I can't keep protecting that for other people.
Mm-hmm.
People need to step away from that. If you say the wrong thing, then deal with it when it is said. But to mince your words and to try to stay in protected space. Again, that's staying in a comfort zone because you feel someone's going to see something differently in you, is cutting it short. It's not taking the step. It is not being the ally. It is saying, I'm going to stay in my space until I feel as though you tell me what's the best thing or the right thing to say. And I can't give you those words. And I don't think anyone can give you those words. You have to step out on faith and allow yourself to be a part of the situation.
You know what, I appreciate that, Dr. Butler, and I appreciate this conversation. I think it's not holding back your words, but also it's not hiding behind social media and using platforms to make statements without engaging in the conversation. And what do I mean by that? I shared with the past presidents on May 27, 2020, ACA posted the following statement on their Facebook social media page. As more white individuals become aware of their privilege and the racial injustice that exists in our country, greater degrees of systemic change are possible. Counselors are uniquely equipped to facilitate these discussions given their interpersonal skills and passion for advocacy. They also included a link for an article from Counseling Today titled 5 Points of Discussion for Conversations About Racial Injustice. I went in and I read some of the comments today. And I don't know if they're from students, counseling professionals, counselor educators and supervisors, or others who just follow ACA. But how do we respond to those that either hold back not saying anything, or they publicly post all of these microaggressions, biases, discrimination in our professional organizations' social media site?
Mm.
And the victim can't help you decide how you're going to help the victim, because the victim has been screaming for a long time and it hasn't worked yet.
You know what I think about, Dr. Tinsley, when I read this, your example here, and you're sharing it with us here, it almost seems to me like ACA's trying to do something good, okay, to invite this conversation. Unmoderated conversations aren't always professional. Even moderated cannot be professional, but when you have an unmoderated conversation, I ask the question, what are the lessons learned from people saying what they're going to say or not having someone point out to them? I'm not sure I would agree with that. I mean, there's, something's wrong with the fact that people can just dump and say they don't believe in white privilege, and they're in the counseling profession. I am sort of speechless on one hand that it's done so freely and so openly, and that no one's calling them on it, I guess is what you brought it to our attention now. So it's curious to me. I don't know, Gargi, you have something to say there.
Kent and Patricia, I think I spoke about how Americans deny the fact of racism, and they can do that because there is this fake political ideology that we have freedoms, we have equal rights, freedom of speech, and we emphasize on democracy. And so that kind of ideology enables people to regard others who are less able to achieve with the deficit model. I think that especially currently in the current administration, they completely deny racism on the basis of the fact that this is an equal opportunity society. You know, that's what they say, we have affirmative action, but not understanding the inhumanity and the brutality of our attitudes and our actions. So we're dealing with an impossible history of how we Americans view ourselves as free people, equal people, with freedom of speech, with free public school education.
Other thoughts? Dr. Chang, Dr. Brooks?
Dr. Moore able to talk yet, or is he having some issues?
No. Dr. Moore, I don't know if you got my email. I said to log out of Zoom and log back in, because when you came in before, we could hear you. Okay. Dr. Chang, Dr. Brooks?
There have been some comments in the chat about white allies and what some white people are doing. And it is true. And it's not, when we talk about white people, we don't mean every single white person. And so we are aware, and there needs to be work around that within counseling, within ACA. There needs to be, opportunities for those of you who are aware and are allies and are socially engaged to be able to talk to others. On Facebook, just this morning, one of my former students posted and asked and said, I'm sympathetic to what's going on, blah, blah, blah. What should I be doing as a white ally? And I thought it was very interesting. A lot of the responses were religious in some sense of saying that, just pray or, other things similar to that. And so I wasn't going to say anything, but when I saw those responses, I just thought that's not concrete enough. And so I then responded and said what we've said for decades, and that is the most that you can do, the best that you can do is spend your time talking to other white people. That is really, really important for them to do. We don't need to be expending our energy. We do this in our jobs all the time, and it's exhausting. But so that's one thing, the most that they can do is spend their time doing that. The other is finding their voice of, whether they're going to do it by writing. Maybe they're not an extrovert. They're not someone who's going to, verbally speak out, but they could be writing. They could be doing a blog. They could be, whatever. They could be using their voice that way. It could be visual. They could create visual things. They could do that, but they need to be able to do that. They also need to recognize that they could be there for those microaggressions. Whether it's when you're sitting in a meeting and a person of color says something and people completely ignore it like you're invisible, like they never even heard you. That they can then speak up and say, oh, I'd rather let Dr. So-and-so speak, so they can use their privilege to be able to allow you to get your voice heard. Or something as small as in being in a store and the clerk ignores you forever so that you don't get served. You could be that white person who says, no, don't wait on me. Wait on this person. They've been waiting a long time. So they can be that person to be able, they can do a lot of things. Big issues I've seen on Twitter. There's some video of white protesters who have stood in front of some of the people of color in front of, and coming between the police and the protesters of color. So there are things that can be done, but I do acknowledge that just like there are examples and models for us, out there in books, in our histories that we tell, in our stories, in our testimony. And so on. I've heard people alluding to Fannie Lou Hamer today and so on. So we have those stories. There are not so many stories of white activism around racism and white privilege that little white kids can grow up on and so on. So I do understand that they don't have that model and wonder how to do that. So I know when I was teaching at a PWI, that with my students, I would do demonstration activities for them to show them and use examples from history of white people taking social action. I would take them out into communities. I would do outreach with them. They need to know how to do it. And so that needs to be done. I'm glad to see that some of those white students that I've had who are now faculty are now white faculty taking students out and doing outreach with them. That's what needs to be done. That is not for me to be doing that. That feeds into all kinds of archetypes of who I am and what I'm about, mammyism and so on. My job is not to nurture white people, but I understand that that's in the psyche. And so it's white people need to take that on for themselves to be able to do that. And there are people out there doing it, but the numbers are too small, and overwhelmingly what we have are all these closet racists who are in counseling. And so, yes, we need to be able to deal with that. And some of that has to do with something that I know Patricia's talked about, and Thomas and so on, about we need to be able to evaluate multicultural counseling courses in programs nationally, because I know I've had a chance to go into some of these universities and hear about what they're deeming as their multicultural course and what's happening, and it's insufficient. We know from the work of Kent Butler, Madonna Constantine, and the work around school counselors and their attitudes toward multiculturalism, they by far are the most resistant, okay, from the research. Now, this is not me, this is from the research. They are of all of the counseling fields, they are the most resistant to multicultural counseling. And those are the ones who are dealing with kids, white kids, kids of color, etc. And they're in there with these attitudes about multiculturalism. So it's like, I agree that, it's not enough to just talk about these things, that, we need to use this as an impetus, take that anger, take that energy and use it to come up with some kind of systemic changes to how we are training people, what they're accountable for. We have some things in place. It's like, yeah, if we know the names of some of those people who responded to the Counseling Today tweet, and they in fact are members of ACA, we can take names and respond, because we have an ethics review panel. And we have said that that is not sufficient. That's not competence. That's not clinical competence to be able to do that. So I'm suggesting that maybe our conversation needs to move toward what action can be taken, because we could, we could talk about this forever. I was thinking about when I was AMCD president, what was that, 2007, 8, yes. And there was the noose hanging on the door of Madonna Constantine at Teachers College, Columbia University. And I remember putting that statement out, right? And then a few years later, I was president of ACA and Trayvon Martin gets murdered. And I needed to put out a statement about that. And at the same time, who was it? Sean Smith was president of AMCD, and he's calling me to talk about what should he put, for me to take a look at that. So we finally get into these positions where we're at the table, and we are confronted with, all of these issues. And so I think that we need to figure out what needs to be done. What can we do to leave AMCD and the members of AMCD as well as counselors everywhere, in a better position, so they're not attacked all the time.
You know, if I may add to something you said, struck me in terms of, I think it has to do with the white fragility of it all, right? In terms of how I think people do not want to be lumped in any way, shape, or form with racism, with what it is to be a white racist. And they're trying their hardest to do this work, and I applaud that. But just like Black people have been yelling for days, don't lump me with the full Black community. Don't come and give me this, you know, well, Black people, and then tell lump me in there, and then I'm a part of that stereotype. But when it comes to that other culture, it's all individualistic. Oh, it was that one person who shot up that event. It was that one person who went over there and was racist towards so-and-so and so-and-so. So I can almost feel it in this chat, that the feeling of, you know, oh no, don't lump me. I don't want to be lumped with white people that you see as racist. Now you see what it feels like. Every day, people of color are lumped with people and stereotyped in such a way that their humanity cannot be seen for who they are as an individual.
Dr. Moore? No, we can't hear you. Okay. Thank you, everyone, so far. It's 8:17, and I do want to leave some time at the end for questions, but I like this idea of what does it mean to be action-oriented. So maybe we can move into the actions, the skills, the techniques. And I had some guiding questions. You can follow the guiding questions. You can come in from a different perspective. But when we talk about action-oriented, we know in the profession we need to be multicultural and social justice competent, and that includes advocacy. I had put a question: what does 21st century protest look like? What does it mean to be, to provide culturally sensitive, trauma-informed care, cultural-centered disaster mental health counseling? So let's talk about action steps. What steps should we take moving forward?
I'm just going to say one thing, and I'm going to give it to the panel. You need to check yourself. You need to go inside, see what's in there, and then come back outside and help the world.
Absolutely agree, Dr. Butler. And then I also am reminded with what Dr. Ardana started off with, activism takes on many different forms. And so the other piece of it is that when I talk about advocacy and action to my students, a lot of them get really overwhelmed because in their mind, they have this big advocacy, this big action. And, you know, for action for you, maybe saying one word to one friend. And so also keep in mind, look inward, but also keep in mind what's doable for you, what makes sense for you. And one of the things that I want to share quickly is I've been reading lots of postings on newspapers, social media, because everyone seems to want to make a comment or make a statement, and some are better than others. And this one came from actually our pastor, and a part of it, he wrote, we reject indifference. We reject our quick claims of innocence, and we reject willful helplessness. When it comes to racism in our lives, we love our church, we love our city, and we love our nation. And so part of it, what can you do as an individual to reject indifference? Reject statements like, it's not my problem. What do we as individuals do to reject our quick claims of innocence? I'm not a racist. What do we do as individuals to reject willful helplessness? I can't do anything. And so I think that if we can answer at least those three questions, it can be a start to working towards activism at a personal level.
You know, I'm ready for something a little different.
Yeah.
The conference, for example, seems to be pretty much status quo and almost routine. I think I shared this idea with Dr. Tinsley yesterday. You know, what if just we had the Saturday totally dedicated to social justice and multiculturalism from 8 o'clock to the end of the night. And that's all the presentations were. That's all the keynotes were to discuss, and really have at least one day, if not the whole conference, dedicated to the issues that we're talking about now. We haven't had any discussion as a division. I'm sorry, not as a division, as a professional association, really speaking to these diabolical issues. And it looks like there's not going to be any movement toward that as we prepare for Orlando. I want ACA to lead from the way out front, and not have all the efforts seemingly be grassroots. I think that would start the process for bringing about some type of change. And I don't know if people would escape and not attend anyway, but at least you can say, look, we're gonna abandon all the typical way of doing business and say we're gonna tackle these issues head on. There's a global pandemic, and there's police brutality going on as we speak, and we haven't just shut down the shop and say, okay, we're not going to talk about some of these typical topics. We're going to talk about these things in the big, huge ballroom, and maybe even break it down into groups and have more discussion. But I think that's.
I'm going to add, I totally agree with that. And I would add one more to that to say is, why not do action tied to that? Why not demonstrate? Why not organize some sort of protest or some sort of community engagement? I would say that last time that a division tackled or attempted to tackle this issue is for 2 years. I think it was in 2009. ACES did do 2 years of back-to-back their social justice summit. I don't know if anybody remembers. As a part of the ACES conference, they had a whole day of ACES summit. And the idea was, when we first set that up, that would be at least something that ACES would take on every year. It lasted through 2 presidents. And then the 3rd president came and took it out of the budget. So
well, I'm fine with the community action, but I want it to be in my curriculum. I want it to be in my state licensure laws. I want it to be in my policy and procedures. I want every officer who doesn't have a social justice agenda to resign.
Yep.
I want something drastic, because we're doing more of the same.
Right, and so I agree with you. I wholeheartedly agree with you. But the thing that first popped into my mind when you said that is there got to be accountability. And on that day, that one day that you tell people to do this whole day of multicultural training and things along those lines, make sure they do not go and then visit the conference town.
May I just jump in now, because this sounds like it's such a novel thing, but it would be novel for ACA.
Yeah.
But, you know, as a member of other divisions of APA, Division 45, Division 17, Division 17 was going to be all on liberation. Of course, with the pandemic, it was canceled. So it is possible to do this. And what I think about with action, there are 2 things I'm thinking about, Dr. Tinsley. One is, having heard about all these posts that are going on out there, I would support you or join with you to go to Richie up and say, this is not right. We cannot allow this to happen. We can't just, talk about it here. I think I always say, let's go the next step. Let's call this out and let's find out how we can get into this situation, how we can help people who are trying to do honest work there, but now we're going to get intimidated because they're reading some horrible comments that someone says they don't believe in white privilege. So that's one thing action we can do. I think the second thing, I definitely support what Dr. Brooks has said about a one-day multicultural social justice summit at the conference. We used to have summits within the conference. Some of you may know that, some themes that would cut through the conference, and then you would have programs for those particular themes within the ACA conference. It happens at others. So I I think it can be done. I think AMCD can lead that with the Counselors for Social Justice, with other divisions that are also allies. I think we need to think about allies in terms of divisions as well.
Absolutely.
And there are clearly individuals within those divisions that are our allies, but back in the day, we used to talk about the divisions that were sort of the hard charging, and then those that were the softer ones. So we would have CSJ or ASGW, the acerbic, and then the hard charging ones were the mental health, but I think they're gone, and school are gone. So I think there's a lot of room to focus on the realities that are facing the society and having counseling take a lead. Thank you.
Tanya, I
Yes.
would like you as our president to communicate with ACA that their statement that we need to become, if we become aware of racism, then there are possibilities of change. I mean, like some people who have mentioned, I have done a lot of research in the area of awareness and multicultural counseling competencies. We are beyond awareness, as Michael and Patricia and Catherine are talking about. We have to take action, and it has to be collective action. So it's not just, again, people of color doing social justice work, going into the community like I do, collecting data from within the community with stakeholders. It's not, it should be collective action. We need to get feminists, and we need to get anti-racist white people to join, to bring about change, to this word collective action, not just my personal empowerment, because that's what psychology has emphasized a lot, this kind of personal upliftment and empowerment, but we need to have collective empowerment, collective action to bring about change. And ACA's statement is ridiculous about if we become aware, then changes in racism is a possibility. You know, it's like a pie in the sky kind of statement.
Right. Thank you for that. And I will say this. We've heard the statement, a crisis can be danger, but it can be opportunity for growth. And I think the timing is right with what we're talking about with ACA and collaborations. And Dr. Simone Lambert has been very supportive as ACA past president. Dr. Sue Pressman has reached out and wants to, continue working together. And I will say with the division, SAGE and CSJ have been wonderful. And we're looking at doing some more collaboration with some events in the next coming weeks. And one of the things I think it's important is that we have to be consistent. We can't just start it now and not be consistent moving forward. And leadership comes from within, and so we need to make sure that leadership within continues to push from what gets started as well. So, Dr. Moore, I think you are connecting. Don't hang up. It shows on my end you're connecting. Oh, did he hang up?
There's a will, there's a way. Uh-oh.
It shows that you're connecting. He's putting the password in. Let's give him 60 seconds.
But we need to have the audience also ask questions, because we don't want, I mean, that would be exactly what we don't want to happen. We want everyone to join in and collectively, think through this and participate together.
Well, let me give you one question that has come in as he's coming. What are the panelists' thoughts on Black women being erased from this discussion? And I would say not only Black women, but all women of color I know I was listening to something the other day about the police brutality and the shootings of the two gentlemen, and people forget to say Breonna Taylor's name.
Yeah.
Right? So what are your thoughts about the discussion of including women of color, Black women, Asian women, Latinx women, Native American?
What do you mean when you say include, Dr. Tinsley?
The question came in is, what are your thoughts on Black women being erased from this discussion?
This discussion or this?
As a whole, as a whole.
As a whole.
Yes.
So I think about it in a number of ways, but you know, whoever has the bully pulpit gets to talk. So that's one thing. And the commentators, I hate to say, tend to be men. Whether it's more dominant white men, but you'll see more men of color having a voice than women of color. So I think those are contributing factors. I also think that women our ideas aren't invited, or we're not invited. We're not invited, so we have to always wedge our way in. And I have found that that's been the story of my career. It's like, okay, I can't wait to be called. I've got something to tell you. And so we have to speak out just like we're doing now. And I hope to the example of our listeners and all the attendees is, you know, step up, speak up when you have to. Don't ask permission if you have something to say. So I don't think there's sensitivity to the presence of.
Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Alive and well. Okay, Dr. Moore, step right in.
Oh, Patricia, I'm sorry, you were talking. Okay, I just got in when you said there's something I have to tell you.
I'm just going to finish my thought. I just was going to say sexism is so present in our society. And it starts from this pseudo leadership in this country, as we know, that always gets a pass on anything that's sex related. And I'll just stop there. So we have to keep pushing ourselves forward as women and doing it together. Thank you. Okay, Dr.
Okay.
Dr.
Well,
Moore,
let me say,
you can go wherever you want.
well, thank you. Well, let me say this. Last year, I believe there was a woman of color from California who was invited to do a presentation at a college or a university, I believe in South Carolina. And she wrote a book called White Privilege. Okay. And she got there and the white students rioted in the room. Okay. And there was like, how dare, telling school, how dare you bring her here? There's no such thing as white privilege. Yeah. The president of the university ended up apologizing to them. Okay. And for bringing her there. And this is exactly what we're talking about. Okay. People continue to apologize for being insensitive to what's happening to people of color and not wanting to understand it. And especially when we talk about Black folks, one of the things that we don't understand, and this hurt me to my heart, it had to be 10 years ago, Howard University made it mandatory that every student had to take a Black history course. Now, it never crossed my mind that students didn't have to take Black history there, but every student, it mandatory because students of color was not taking it, and it was mostly like foreign students. We don't understand the history of our people. My mother escaped from Mississippi in the 10th grade. Now, she says she left school and just moved to Chicago, but I know she escaped to get away from that kind of environment. And then when I was a young kid in the 60s, she went on the march to Washington, okay? And when she came back, she gave me the history lesson of my life. And she said she never would think Blacks and white would march together in unity and social justice. Where have we continued to go backwards in terms of looking at? Okay, I always look at leadership. I talk to my students about understanding leadership. I've always, when I was in Virginia, I took students to a plantation. And the night before, I made sure there was a major lesson and discussion on understanding slavery, how African citizens was brought over as enslaved people. And even okay, during the Revolutionary War. We sometimes hear about 5,000 citizens of Africa, and they call them slaves. I call them citizens of Africa, was involved with the Revolutionary War. But what they don't tell you, that 20,000 was working with the British in terms of in the military, okay, just to get away from that, get away from the country and to do a variety of things. So we don't understand it. Young people today, they don't understand the history. They understand a little bit of what happened 10 years ago. And when they ask the question, was this Rodney King? Is this how you felt? And we're looking at the same things going over and over again. In the places that I lived and worked, especially in Virginia, and I was in Richmond for over 16 years. Okay, I was a member of the juvenile court domestics trial system. I worked with the high schools on advisory boards. I worked in the community and tried to do as much as I could to make sure that we had the right type of thought process when we moved on. What we continue to do is that we need to help. We need to continue to be involved in the cities, in the communities, and in the universities that we work. And I know we're involved with the universities because that's what we do. But it's so important for us to make sure that people understand the history of everything. And for us to understand that, you know, General Washington put out a decree that you couldn't be a young person if you couldn't carry a gun, you couldn't be in the Continental Army, you couldn't be an older person. And at that time, you couldn't be a citizen of Africa and what they call Negroes. It wasn't until the British, okay, told them they could join them and have their freedom. And even at the end of the Revolutionary War, when they had to sign the treaty, the British wanted to buy all the enslaved people, okay, in the United States at that time, okay, and then take them back with them and free them. And South Carolina and North Carolina would not sign anything because you weren't going to take away their property. So we need to understand what is happening and what continued to happen to us. And the way people have felt about us as being less than, okay, regardless whether you have a degree from Harvard and walking in the park looking at the flowers and the birds and the trees, you can still go to jail. It don't make a difference. And the way that we've been looked at as being less than, and the way they treated our President Obama right from the beginning, calling him a liar, talking about his wife as being like a gorilla. I mean, what kind of hate is that? That's not things that's festered up in you and that you want to believe. We have to continue to address these issues in every community, on a local and definitely on a national level.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. Thank you, Dr. Moore.
He was ready to unleash. There you go.
Yes, yes. I was just checking to see if anyone has any questions. I don't see any questions yet. I'll pose a question to all of you past presidents. Is there anything you would have liked to have said tonight that you didn't get a chance to say?
I'll just emphasize it right now, and I pointed it out because I just prepared with a few colleagues a statement about the crisis in the country through the American Association of Hispanics in Higher Education. I chaired that group. And in our statement, what we've emphasized is the need to have Black and Latino communities in particular come together, because we have the Afro-Latinx communities that often pull themselves away because they feel like maybe there's a skin color difference or there's some difference that they don't want to get involved with. So I just say that here, that I've talked about coalition building among all of us because of we share a lot of our common goals and common concerns. But I do want to emphasize how important it is for the Afro-Latinx and the African-American communities to do more together. Thank you.
Thank you.
we continue to talk about our message to end inequalities. But we need to be able to look at the efforts to acknowledge the very real pain that people are suffering, and especially people of color in this country. Now, the police department, they have so many case studies that they could have used throughout the last 50 years to address inequality among people. They have so many things, from shooting someone 16 times in the back to putting to hanging them and shooting them in the car. Okay, they have so many case studies, but what are they doing? Okay, do we have anybody in our areas on a police board in any cities to talk about some of the things they've been doing or what they need to be? And it shouldn't take an incident like what's happening here today to say that we need to do this or we need to be better at doing that. I just think it's so important for us to look at what can we do and what do we need to continue to do. And not only in our classroom, our students are definitely need to be more aware, because they don't know. And so often they don't understand history. But what little thing can each of us do? What one board on the local level can we join or ask to be a part of with our governor or with our police board or with any board that we can address inequalities? And what are some of the things that impact upon the real pain that people suffer? What don't we know? And that should be the question in any of these committees or any of these organizations. I'm pissed. Okay, we talked about being mad, okay, about what's happening to us. It hurts my heart when I see a woman, a white woman, hollering and screaming and becoming hysterical and saying that a black man threatening her.
Yeah.
And like I said before, it could be any of us walking down the street. And people wonder why we're not more parents, why we're not crazier than what we are now, because of the strength that we've had. Okay, when I think about my mother who raised 7 kids by herself, and my parents were divorced, working 2 jobs, and me as a little boy in the streets going to clean up some white teacher's home for her 3rd job during that week. And I remember the things she talked about that she went through, and I remember her suffering. And I have to say to myself, I'm hoping if this is the worst thing that's going to happen to me in my life, I'm going to get off real lucky. But I still feel the pain. I feel the pain that if there was someone that was out in the streets, it could have been anybody that I know that continue to hurt my heart, because it should be something we need to continue to do. And I have no idea how long I'm going to be on this earth, but I know I'm going to continue to move forward and try and make a difference.
Thank you.
Let me add to that also about what it is that we study and the issue of oppression. So it's real important. I think that social justice counseling is so valuable because it teaches us about oppression. So it's so important for us to be educated to understand what are we dealing with. And social justice counseling can help with that, teaching about social justice counseling, not only the acts, but also to be able to deconstruct what's happening to us is really important. And so we have to take a look at, what do they study? What do they force us to study when we're graduate students? You understand? So the idea of understanding that. So I think about issues like we're constantly being suggested that we have anger management issues. Our children have behavior disorder issues and so on. But when we think about the kind of macroaggressions and microaggressions that we have experienced during our time here, and I'm talking about all of us. When I did the webinar a couple of weeks ago, I started, running down some of the historical issues for Native American people, for Latinx people, for Asian American people. It's like, we all have a history of trauma. So when you take a look at that and see how we are still loving and kind and forgiving all the time. When I said today about, somebody asked about what should I do as a white ally, first thing we want to do is say, pray on it. So it's like, we are the poster child, the poster children for anger control. We do control ourselves, because otherwise If we didn't have that moral fiber, it would be chaos because of how we're treated, I'm talking about. So it's like you have to look at that. And when I teach the multicultural class, I teach the rules of oppression. So students can take a look and see how systematically, institutionally, that these things are structured. So they do things like they aggress against us, but the narrative is that we're aggressive. They fear us, and they say that we're fearful, we're anxious, we have all these issues. So it's important for us to not just feel things. It's important for us to be educated about our history, educated about racism and oppression, so that we can be strategic. Okay, we can't take other people's ideas. So I don't think we even understand how much of those ideas are in our heads, so that when we speak, if we haven't been re-educated or diseducated, right, about the way of the things that we've been taught within our schooling, within our graduate education, if we don't hear, you know, the idea of, you know, our history, of our own stories and these narratives, and I'm sure, I mean, that would be wonderful. So to Dr. Michael Brooks, talking about what would we do during those times, I think it's more than just talking about the cognitive things. It's also sharing the stories, because we hear Quincy, and I mean, you should have seen people just automatically commenting in the chat. It is the narrative, it's the testimonials, right? All of these things that we know from our research about how we cope. And so it's important to have spaces for us to hear these narratives in order for us to counter, but we still have to be educated. Otherwise, we will continue to do research about what's pathological about us, that we're scary, we have behavior problems, that, you know, we have all these things. We are also the poster child for resilience. That's not studied. You know, to see how after all of that, we continue to have children, have relationships, you know, to be able to come together, you know, those are the things that need to be studied and not the other way around. So we need to be transformative as counselors. We need to really upset the table and really bring a different narrative to the table and to pass that on to these early career people who are coming along. We need to deconstruct the racist ideology in the research, and we need to be able to bring forward our narratives, our stories, our message about what needs to be done, and hold these schools accountable, hold the K-12 schools accountable, hold the graduate programs accountable, hold our politicians accountable. We need to, you know, it's time, it's beyond time, it's beyond time.
And just to jump on what you just said, it's important for them not to hear us, but more important for them to feel us and understanding the things that we've gone through and the fact that we've survived so beautifully as we continue to move on. But they need to hear, and I tell my students this all the time, I don't want you to only hear what I'm saying, I want you to feel what I'm saying. And that's what we have to do on a large scale.
Katerina, anything else? Gargi?
I'm loving listening.
Okay.
Me too, but I agree with Dr. Brooks that we have to help people feel, and that's where narratives come in. And so, you know, as I think about this panel, what I'm going to take away and what I'm going to carry with me are the narratives that I've heard from the other panelists, and just the passion that comes up and the personal stories. So I think, you know, I hope that we continue to honor our narratives and encourage others to tell their narratives as well.
I have a couple questions, and they're not in any particular order, and everyone, we won't get to all of them, but I will try to be creative. I'm going to come up with a creative way to get these questions answered for you and posted somewhere. So if I don't ask your question, just know I am going to work to with the past presidents to get them answered. many students or many attendees have asked, how do I start these conversations in white spaces? How do I get comfortable with conversations with people of color? I know that I just spoke in Dr. Christy Holloway's class. She has an assignment in her culture class. I had it in my culture class, a cross-cultural dialogue. Here's one of the things: just because it was an assignment in your class doesn't mean you can't continue to move forward with engaging in cross-cultural dialogue. It doesn't have to be an assignment. So go back and look, and what did you do, and try to build upon that. But to the panelists, to the past presidents, people are asking, how do they get comfortable having these conversations? Dr. Butler, your mic is on.
So I will tell you that thanks to Dr. Gerard Lawson, I was a chair of the task force for having difficult dialogues. And we are still working on a manual that we're going to be producing to put out there in terms of how to be comfortable in spaces as counselors having these difficult dialogues around race and culture. So that's one thing, be on the lookout for that. And the other part of the puzzle is just be vulnerable. Allow yourself to go into those spaces. Those things that you would not do before, give yourself permission to do. Go and just have the conversations. A lot of people feel as though having conversations is going to bring about some type of what's happening out there in the world right now. And I'm telling you, I've been involved with so many of these conversations. They do not escalate to that. If people are truly in this to win this and are able to navigate and use their facilitation skills and know how to allow people to share their stories, you will find a richness in this, because we touch each other through our stories, and then we can kind of move the nation. But we have to be able to be uncomfortable and not be afraid to start these conversations.
And I will add too, Dr. Annalise Singh has a new book out. It's a great book, The Racial Healing Handbook, Practical Activities to Help You Challenge Privilege, Confront Systemic Racism, and Engage in Collective Healing. And there's all kinds of different ideas in the book. So even though you're reading, take these ideas and implement them. I would also say get involved in professional organizations, and professional organizations that will challenge you and that will challenge you out of your comfort place so that you can interact and talk to a diverse group of people. So that's what our professional organizations are for.
I do a particular activity which has been quite successful, and in fact I'm doing some research in that area, that when I do community mental health work and disaster mental health work, my team of students who are volunteers, but they also get practicum credit, write self-reflection notes daily. And those notes are very useful in leading them to have peer conversations. Like what Dr. Butler was saying, the difficult dialogues, that those dialogues become less difficult because my students and my volunteer team members who are supervised by me have already written their thoughts about oppression, about injustices, about differences, about inequities, and they themselves come from fairly privileged backgrounds, how they respond to a very different setting and very different experiences of their clients. So I favor, because we are counselors and psychologists, to be first self-reflective before participating in peer conversations about very difficult topics.
Quincy, you're on mute. You got to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. What I was saying was, I think that a lot of times we don't move towards understanding ourselves in terms of looking at how do we do the right thing. And so you need to understand what's the right thing with you. And so often it involves self-reflection, okay? I decided about 20 years ago, I wanted to get a copy of every transcript since I was in kindergarten that I could find on me. And doing that, I looked at the second grade. Instead of going to English, I was going to the nurse's office. Had no idea about it. And after a long time, I realized when I was in the second grade, I stuttered. And so every second grade, every period for English, I would go to the nurse's office. And then it started coming back to me, a lot of things that was happening to me at that point in time. Now, we need to look at a cultural, background in each of us. In terms of what are the things that made me think certain things the way I am, what are the experience, what are the groups I've been in that says things that I should have said. These are the things that people got to recognize within themselves and then have that as part of a conversation so people can feel them also.
Absolutely. I want to point out, Dr. Wes Olatunji mentioned the book Intersections, and we have to consider intersectionality. Somebody had posted a question about thoughts regarding the lack of acknowledgement of trans and queer people of color when discussing these issues. And it's really important because I'm going to say another name, Dr. Misty Ginicola, who's the president for SAGE. She put out a statement, and in addition to George Floyd last week, there was Tony McDade in Florida. And so we need to just make sure that we consider all of the intersectionalities and how, again, all of our divisions overlap. It doesn't matter that AMCD shouldn't be the only division focusing on multicultural issues, and we should be collaborating. Counselors for Social Justice shouldn't be the only division focusing on social justice. It doesn't have to be limited to one division. And so let's continue to collaborate and to have these discussions. We have 3 minutes remaining. I also want to mention that Dr. Heather Trapal, who is the current ACA president, has been on, and she just wanted to reiterate that ACA is in support of working together. I think Dr. Judy Daniels put this in the chat, but the Governing Council has a meeting on Wednesday, and this is going to be a topic of discussion. And let's just continue to move from talking about it to being action oriented. And that's key. I think everyone who was on this webinar tonight, this town hall, everyone who listens to the recording, we have to be working together to be consistent and hold our organizations accountable.
Can we get an amen?
Thank you. Thank you.
So as we come to an end, I want to thank all of our past presidents. Many people know I try to be strategic in my thinking, and with everything going on last week, I didn't want to rush to figure out what we're going to do. And I woke up in the middle of the night one night and said, here's the answer. I was a little nervous that it was last minute when I emailed all the past presidents, but they answered the call. So I really appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you so much for taking your time out today. And thank you everyone who participated today in the town hall. Continue the discussions. Continue the discussions for those of you that are students in your classrooms. Continue the discussions in your professional organizations. Continue the discussions with family and friends. And it's only going to become more comfortable, and you're going to be more confident as you continue to have those discussions. So I will just say good night to everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. And
Thank
please,
you again.
everyone, be safe and take care of yourself. Self-care strategies.
And the same to you and your family, dear. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Those of you still on the line, tell your faculty, tell your supervisors, enforce that they need to talk about these things in their sessions and in their supervision of you.
Thank you.
All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
It's
Thank
good.
you, Tanya.
It's good seeing everyone.
Can
Okay.
the panelists stay on for?
Huh?
What?
Can the panelists please stay on?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you to my co-hosts, Dr. Kay Cole, Christy Holloway, LaShonda Lemon. I appreciate you three greatly.
We appreciate them greatly.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Can
Good
you close off
night.
the Facebook Live?
Dr. T, do you want to stop recording or keep
Oh,
recording?
yes, thank you very much. And then, Christy, I'll touch